Coming up on the live and interactive ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, Edgar and I will get you all of your latest news and information from the state capitol and CDE with an in-depth analysis on how it impacts you. Plus, we are covering two topics today. One, the U.S. Department of Education and more shifts to programs to other departments. We've got a reporter from Washington, D.C. to talk about that. Plus, the Legislative Analyst's Office, their fiscal outlook is out for 26-27. We're going to talk about that with our budget experts as well.
The ACSA Legislative Lunch Break starts now.
And it's just after 1 o'clock. We welcome you on a Wednesday to the live and interactive ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, along with Dr. Edgar Zazweta, ACSA's Executive Director. I'm Naj and Edgar, ACSA's Senior Director of Marketing and Communications. Welcome. We are honored to have you with us today. Go ahead and jump into the chat and say hello and let us know where you're watching from. Edgar, it's been a little time since we've been here, but we had a busy week, not last week, but the week before at ACSA Leadership Summit.
It was great seeing folks. It was great seeing anytime we're in person. I know that location, especially in San Francisco, for me is noteworthy because and it's connected to Legislative Lunch Break, right? We talked about how years back, I forget the year, 2022, I think it was our first in-person conference after the pandemic. We were there at that hotel, and this, Naj, this was after a couple of years of all we did was this, right? Mm-hmm. Like lunch break, Zooms, whatnot. It's one way, even though we had a lot of interaction with our folks. I just remember like just being socially overwhelmed the first time around, just because we weren't used to interacting with folks, right? But it's a reminder too, though, because I remember how it felt some years back, and then all these years later, just the power of connection, the power of all of us just coming together. And so, yeah, it was a great conference. It was great seeing a lot of folks. I met some of your fans as well, Naj. I hope you gave them an autograph there. I know there were some folks who were very excited about getting a picture with you. So hopefully you didn't let them down.
I did not let them down. Pictures and everything. I promised that I will send 8x10s to all of them. As soon as you pay for them, I will absolutely send them over. Neri Pais and Rusty Gordon and ACSA State Vice President for Legislative Action, Jared Hungerford, on the chat this morning. We will get two important topics today, and we're going to cover them a little bit here in the news. One, U.S. Department of Education, the Trump administration moving around some programs, or at least that's a proposal. We're going to talk with Mark Lieberman from Education Week about that. And then the Legislative Analyst's Office dropped their fiscal outlook. We've got our governmental relations team, our budget experts, to talk about that. Let's go ahead and talk first, Edgar, about the fiscal outlook. This report came in a couple of hours ago here to our newsroom. The legislature, according to the Legislative Analyst's Office, faces a budget shortfall of nearly $18 billion in 26-27. That's about $5 billion larger than what was anticipated by the Newsom administration in June. So some key numbers there. This is despite some revenue improvements, according to the release. The LAO said the reasons for that will include the constitutional spending requirements for Prop 98 and Prop 2, which, quote, almost entirely offsets the revenue gains. The LAO estimates the costs in other programs will be about $6 billion higher than anticipated. So we are going to have Cordell Hampton, our ACSA budget expert, in to talk about that. Edgar, we know that sometimes the LAO and the governor's budget team don't agree on what the finances are going to look like, but these numbers coming in, certainly interesting numbers that have come in.
It feels like, it's almost on every November. Mm-hmm. I've been thinking a lot. I've been doing a lot of reflection because, as it was noted, I just celebrated 10 years at ACSA last week. So I was thinking about my time at ACSA and in November. And it just so happens that I feel like every November, it's when this fiscal forecast comes out. It's never good news. I mean, let's be honest. There's always a downer there. Like, yeah, sometimes it ends up being better than what we anticipate, but it's not, this is kind of how it rolls here in California, right? And I think credit to the LAO and our friends there who do great work. trying to put caution to the wind on some of the things. It doesn't matter which administration. I feel like almost always the LAO's projections tend to be a little bit more conservative there. So yeah, we're going to start yet another budget cycle and just see where we go here. I'm really curious to get Cordell's insights here in a little bit.
Yeah. He's been looking at the LAO's report since it came out around the 10 o'clock hour. So we'll hear from Cordell in just a couple of moments. Also, there are more changes coming to the U.S. Department of Education designed to further strip down the department. These were announced yesterday. The Trump administration is moving forward on some transitions. We'll show you a little bit of what those transitions look like. The Office of Elementary and Secondary Education Programs moves to the Department of Labor, while it will oversee more than $20 billion of federal education funding, Title I specifically. Health and Human Services will be in charge of a grant program for parents attending college and management of foreign medical school accreditation. The State Department will take on foreign language programs. The Department of the Interior will now oversee Native American education. We heard from U.S. Education Secretary Linda McMahon yesterday about these upcoming changes.
I want to prove to Congress that these transfers of programs are more efficient and that they work. And so if we can do that, then hopefully then we can get Congress to vote and to codify those transfers and make it a permanent move.
And that was Education Secretary Linda McMahon. So let's go ahead. Let's bring in our guest right now to get us some information on what all of this means. Mark Lieberman is a reporter at Education Week covering school finance. Some of his previous reporting has also been featured in USA Today and Vice. Mark joining us here for the first time on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. Mark, thanks so much for being with us. We've had a lot of these moments over the past year where a decision in Washington has some true ripple effects that are far-reaching. The question we keep getting, what are the implications for the states? So we come to you. Tell us what you know.
Absolutely. So as both of you mentioned right up front, several key offices within the Department of Education will be moving under other agencies. So almost everything in the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education, you mentioned Title I, all of the title formula funding programs are under that umbrella, as well as McKinney-Vento for homeless students, the Rural Education Achievement Program, a number of other discretionary grant programs. Virtually, with one major exception, I'll get to in a moment, virtually all federal funding streams from the Education Department to K-12 schools, moving from the Department of Education to the Department of Labor. The exception being the Office of Indian Education, which administers grants to schools with large numbers of Native American students. That program and those sets of funds will be moved over to the Department of the Interior. And then some of the higher ed programs you mentioned going to HHS and to state. So the key question that I think everybody is asking and that we don't have 100% definitive answers on yet, but we're starting to get some clarity is how significant this is in terms of, districts that are receiving these funds or working with any of these programs. So, the department has made it very clear, Secretary McMahon said yesterday very explicitly, that these moves are not intended to disrupt or change funding levels for any of the programs. The Trump administration has no authority to change budget levels for these programs without congressional approval. There is no, at this point, full year federal budget approved by Congress for the current fiscal year for education. That would affect money going to schools starting in July of next year for the 2026-27 school year. So while funding, remains a question mark from that perspective, at least in terms of what the department is aiming to do here, funding changes are not on the agenda. However, there are some questions about management of these programs.
Mm-hmm.
I was on a call yesterday with Trump administration press staff, and somebody asked whether the staff members who in the Department of Education who work on these programs that are affected by the transitions, if they will be moved as well to become employees of the agencies where the programs are going, or whether people who currently work at the agency that is receiving these programs will take ownership of them. the indication that we got from that question is that the staff will move, but from the Department of Education to Labor, Interior, HHS with their programs. However, they were not very clear about how many staff members will move, when or how that move will happen. And our understanding from our reporting is that the staff members themselves do not, at this point, know what the future holds for them. Many of these staffers were also laid off by the Trump administration in the early days of the federal shutdown. And then when Congress ended the shutdown, part of the deal, the agreement that ended the shutdown, brought those people back to work. So it's kind of been a whiplash-inducing experience for people in those programs. Getting back to your core question, though, what does this mean for states? What does it mean for districts? I think at the minimum, the abrupt nature of the announcement, the sort of complexity of these moves from one agency to another, where the U.S. Department of Education will still have control over the policy itself, Title I, Title II, et cetera, but the actual administering of the grants will happen within a different agency. That is going to create some questions for, state education agencies about just procedurally, how are they going to access the money? Who do they contact if they have questions? Will there be a smooth process for determining how much money each state or district is getting for a particular program? All of those questions I think are relevant and I think are not entirely answered by the documentation we've seen so far of these changes. There was one interagency agreement like these earlier this year, prior to the government shutdown, with the Education Department shifting the Perkins Career Technical Education Program to the Department of Labor. We haven't gotten a ton of insight so far into how that has gone. My vague understanding is that there has been some additional paperwork or kind of bureaucratic complexity for states resulting from that. But at this moment, I think the key questions are about sort of what will this actually look like for the people working on these programs, and then by extension for the people who need to be in touch with those people.
Mark, thanks for your help today. Thanks for being here, and thanks for just your organization, your publication. I know us as an organization and as a system always want more attention on some of obviously these education issues, and arguably I don't know that anybody does it better than Education Week at the national level. So appreciate your work. You kind of touched on some of my question in terms of the expertise level. I guess it's going to depend on, like you stated, which staff are actually going to follow the programs, but maybe since you talked to some of the administration officials, what was their rationale in terms of why were they moving? Obviously, we've heard why they wanted to downsize the Department of Ed, and we've had a lot of conversations on that piece. But why did they land where they landed? Department of Labor, would you think about Title I, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act? Kind of, what's the stated rationale there from the administration?
Yeah, so overall, before we get to the specific programs and kind of why they chose the agencies they chose, overall the message that they conveyed, both the secretary and the other officials that have spoken about this, the message they conveyed is that they see this as a step towards their ultimate goal of eliminating the agency. So as McMahon herself said in the clip we just watched a few minutes ago, the goal here is kind of a proof of concept. The administration has taken a position that these programs, this agency, does not need to exist in its current form in order for funding that Congress appropriates for education to get where it needs to go. And so they are basically preemptively taking a step to illustrate that by moving these programs to other agencies. And then their case is that if that is successful, they will ask Congress to codify those changes and sort of permanently sever the connection between the individual programs and the agency itself on the road to eliminating the agency altogether. Now, I feel like I am obligated to mention at this stage that the legality of these moves is I think up for debate and will be up for debate. We've heard some early indications that there may be lawsuits challenging some of these changes. We've obviously seen a number of lawsuits challenging other Trump administration moves around education, specifically kind of cornering the question of whether the administration has the unilateral authority to make these changes. So that is something to watch for sure. Now, in terms of the rationale behind moving a particular program to a particular agency, the key comment that the administration officials we heard yesterday made about the elementary and secondary education program specifically, they made the case that they see those programs as a form of a workforce program. K-12 schools, in their view, are providing a pipeline for people to enter the workforce, and thus they saw the Department of Labor, which manages most programs directly centered on the workforce, as a natural partner for those programs. Again, I think that's something that people will dispute, and I think you'll see a lot of philosophical debate and also a lot of legal debate on that topic. Some of the other changes they've made, the Indian education programs moving to the Interior. The Interior Department already has a sub-agency called the Bureau of Indian Education, which manages certain programs and policies pertaining to tribal education. And so, they saw the move there as a natural fit. I should also mention just because I think there was some confusion in the early reporting on this on these changes, that two major functions of the department that we have not mentioned in this conversation at all, as of this moment, remain in the Department of Education and have not been transferred elsewhere. And those are special education, IDEA, Parts B and C, formula funding for serving students with disabilities. Staff who work on those programs remain in the Department of Education. The same goes for civil rights enforcement. The Office of Civil Rights at this moment remains in the Department of Education. The administration did, however, indicate that they are working on similar moves for those two offices. And so we may hear something similar before too long about those. But
yeah, that was actually John Schilling's question about IDEA and whether that was going to change over to Health and Human Services, because that was not mentioned as part of this overall piece. I do want to ask this final question, because I think this one is important. You'd said earlier when we referenced the interview that Secretary Linda McMahon was in, about there can't be any changes to the funding mechanism because that requires congressional approval. So we already know that federal education funding has been paused. It was paused previously while the Trump administration was doing whatever type of analysis that they were doing. I think the question that a lot of our viewers want to know is, once we get past the current funding situation, because we've had this movement, because we've had so many programs under the microscope, are we going to see less federal funding now because of any of these decisions that are being made?
Yeah, I think that's a big question on several fronts. Obviously there is the core concern about what Congress will decide in terms of a federal budget for education for the upcoming fiscal year and beyond. Prior to the government shutdown, when the education budget was actively being discussed, which has not been really since the shutdown started, the House and the Senate were advancing competing budget bills with very different levels of funding for some of these key programs. The Senate bill largely maintained level funding for everything from Title I, Title II onward, even modest increases for a couple of those programs, whereas the House version of the bill of the budget included pretty substantial cuts to many of those programs, several $1 billion shave off of Title I, eliminating Titles II and III altogether, and kind of hewing closer to the Trump administration budget proposal that we saw earlier this year. Now, so where Congress will ultimately land on that remains to be seen. Obviously, there's considerable pressure on Republicans to align with Trump administration's agenda, but we have seen in the arena of education specifically some scattered examples where Republicans are willing to break from the president to some degree, which gets me to the second part of your question. The funding freeze from July 1st that you're talking about for this year, which affected a bunch of formula programs. Trump administration withheld that money that was due to flow on July 1st, ended up releasing it later in the month after bipartisan backlash and several court challenges arose. I think what that situation showed is that while there is a legal barrier to the administration making unilateral changes to formula funding. There is not inherently a logistical or technical or technological barrier. And so, I do think we learned that the administration was responsive to pressure from a variety of angles to release that money, despite their intention not to in the early part of July. But certainly that remains a live concern for district leaders in a way that I think it would not have been up until this year, when it was assumed that the administration would carry out Congress's will without delay. So, I wouldn't rule out the possibility of continued disruption, even as the rules remain clear.
Temper the expectations for sure. Mark Lieberman, reporter at Education Week covering school finance. Mark, welcome to the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break family. You'll hear from us again. We look forward to having you next time.
Greatly appreciate it. Happy to help, and would love to hear from your members anytime if you have questions or things I should know and be reporting on. So thanks for your time.
Thanks, Mark, very much. We will switch topics here. We talked about the LAO's fiscal outlook for 26-27 is now out, came out this morning. Let's go ahead and bring in Cordell Hampton, ACSA's legislative advocate and our budget expert, onto the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. Cordell, first question. The LAO is projecting that the state's deficit has grown to $18 billion. That is for 26-27 and $35 billion for 2027-28. Can you just give us an idea of what is causing the state deficit to increase?
Yeah, I think just, you think about it in plain English, the state's constitutional and statutory obligations are exceeding its revenue growth. I mean, what we've seen over the past couple months is the state has been reporting that it's had unexpected or unanticipated revenue growth in personal income tax withholdings. But when you think about the state's big three revenue generators, personal income tax holdings, corporation tax, and sales tax, personal income tax is the only kind of category that's been kind of exceeding expectations and something that the state has been relying on for the past couple of years. Whereas corporations tax and revenue from sales tax have kind of been decreasing and steadily decreasing for the last couple of years. And this is something that the LEO has been reporting on for a couple of years. And you look at their graphs, it goes not only for 26-27, but also goes into 27-28. When you think about these kind of unanticipated growth, you think, oh, that's just more money for the state. But because of the constitutional and statutory obligations, and when I say that, I'm talking about Prop 98 and Prop 2. Prop 98 is the funding mechanism, obviously, for TK-12 and community colleges, and then Prop 92 is the state's rainy day fund. That takes up a lot of that new revenue. And as a result, that doesn't leave a lot of left over for the non-98 or non-rainy day side. Mm-hmm. So, and very similar to 25-26, we're also seeing a lot of increases in health and human services and state operations. Caseload continue to grow. It's also inflation. And because revenue is so closely tied to personal income tax, particularly due to the tech sector and these kind of high salary jobs, and also capital gains, revenue from capital gains tax, it's created a lot of volatility, and something that we've talked about last year and this year, something we continue to talk about this year. And so really what's caused this kind of deficit to grow is just the volatility in revenue, but then also kind of the ongoing commitments that the state has to meet and is exceeding what the state is actually bringing in.
Mm-hmm. Cordell, thanks for being a quick study here. I know the report just came out earlier today. So appreciate just kind of the tidbits here. So obviously, I think you already alluded to this. Naj talked about it. It sounds like most of the state already has a lot of obligations, right? Prop 98, Proposition 2, so I think the one piece that our members always want to think about, okay, what should we, based on, I know the LAO is not presenting a budget. They give a projection, they're giving recommendations, but you just, how's things looking like in terms of, okay, new funding? Is this going to be your year where the state is going to propose new resources? I know this is going to be, on the political end, this is the administration's last year in office. How is this all this shaping up given the data points that we're getting so far?
I think something you have to keep in mind looking into 26-27 is that the state, as part of the 2025 Budget Act, has some obligations already, right? One, if it's not, we're not forgetting that the state withheld $1.9 billion, right? When Prop 98 was, the minimum guarantee was calculated to be 120 million. The state also depleted the Prop 98 reserve. And then we also have the $1.9 billion deferral that the state created. So now that we're entering into the second year, and as the administration had mentioned in its settlement proposal that it would pay back whatever the amount is due or owed for Prop 98, potentially that estimate of 120 million could have grown. So now there might be more money that may be coming the Prop 98 way. There might be, the state has to look at paying down its deferral. And then whatever's left over might be a decision of, do we, with there being a structural deficit in the future, do we need to put money into the rainy day fund? And the reason why I mentioned those aspects from the 25 budget is that could very well be a majority of the money there. And it might be on to districts to think about cash flow, what type of reserves do they have in order to meet kind of new obligations, new statutory, new obligations, new spending costs, and what type of volatility will the state continue to see? I think ultimately when you think about new obligations is not creating new obligations that exceed revenue, but also making sure that they have ongoing funding, and then also making sure that from our end, our perspective, that we're protecting Prop 98 and making sure that it's not subject to any more manipulations, thinking about the non-98 side.
Cordell, I'm glad you brought these couple of things up about districts considering their cash flow, about considering new spending and their current obligations. I think given that the LAO is projecting a deficit, an increased deficit, what does that mean for school districts as they get ready to start their budget process, especially when the governor sends out his budget proposal in January?
Yeah, the governor will come up with his budget by January 10th, so we'll probably have a better idea sometime between the 7th and the 9th. But I think something for districts to keep in mind over the next couple of months is to plan with caution. As part of the 25 budget, there is a large discretionary block grant. I'm not 100% sure at the moment if we're going to see another huge discretionary block grant, given some of the obligations that the state already has to meet. So I would say plan with caution, work very closely with your unions, and then try and figure out a solution. And then think about how some of these programs can be sustained, at least for a little bit longer, with one-time funding from the 25 Budget Act. But then also making sure that there's maybe an off-ramp, and also making sure that we're not creating any new programs, since funding from the state might be a little bit tighter this upcoming year and potentially next few years.
Lot to go through. Cordell Hampton, ACSA's legislative advocate and our budget expert. Cordell, so good having you here on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. We look forward to seeing you next time.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
All right, Edgar, that is a lot that we covered today, from DC all the way here to the state capitol with respect to finance. I'll give you 30 seconds. I mean, we covered two important topics. What are you thinking at the end of all of this?
Things are looking a little glitchy on my end, and I'm talking to technology, not the budget. So hopefully you can hear this.
I can still hear. Yes.
As Cordell stated, I mean, I think this is this is the start of the process. I think it gives us an early indication of where the starting point might be for the administration. It'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see how they play this whole year in terms of their policy priorities. We know there's some grander political maybe objectives there with the administration, even beyond California. So it's going to be interesting to see how things shake out. But I think Cordell's advice was prudent there, and giving your question about being cautious about how folks are starting to plan here going into the new year.
Yeah. Folks, if you like what you've seen here on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, we invite you to like us and subscribe to us. If you subscribe to us, specifically on YouTube, you will get instant notifications, if your notification's on, when Edgar and I are about to come on with breaking news. And then you'll get a reminder for our regularly scheduled Wednesday show. And if you have great stories happening in your school communities, we want to tell those stories too. Send your news releases your talking points, your photos to our EdCal editor, Michelle Carl at mcarl@acsa.org. We have covered a lot here, folks. We are closing in on the bottom of the hour. Enjoy your Thanksgiving break. Next week, we'll be on right after that. Have a great rest of the day and rest of the week. Thanks so much for joining us here on the live and interactive ACSA Legislative Lunch Break.